Hello, this video is going to be on Algebra 2 IXL topic I.5, factor by grouping. So when you're factoring by grouping, the idea is to try and get the same thing in the parentheses twice, because then you can actually factor it out, all right? And I'll show you why you're able to do that later on. All right, so here we're going to group these first terms together, and we'll group these second terms together. And we're going to try and factor something out of them so that we get something repeating here, okay? So let's go ahead and look at these first terms. 20t cubed plus 15t squared. Let's go ahead and rewrite that, okay? 20t to the third power, that means there's 3 t's being multiplied times themselves, and 15t squared, right? So this means there's 2 t's being multiplied times themselves. And then in the second part, we're going to be looking at this group. Positive 4t, just 1t, right? And plus 3 is the constant. So let's think, what is the greatest common factor between 20t to the third power and 15t squared? And if you're not sure about that, this skill can be really helpful right here. Factor out a monomial. This is skill I1, and you should have already done that, but if you haven't done it yet, that's a good prerequisite skill, and you will get credit for doing that too, so you might as well try that one first. All right, so we have 20t cubed plus 15t squared. What can I factor out of 20 and 15? What can those both be divided by? They can both be divided by 5, right? That's the greatest common factor. So I'm going to factor out a 5. And then we have t cubed and t squared. Well, the greatest common factor is t squared, because the largest thing that I could divide both these by is 2 of those t's, right? I can't do 3 because this one has 3, but this one doesn't. So what do I multiply by 5t squared to get 20t cubed? I would be multiplying by 4, because 4 times 5 is 20, and t, because t times t squared is t cubed. And then I want to do the same thing for the second term. 5 times what is 15? Well, 3. And t squared times what is t squared? Nothing, right? Just 1. So I can just leave that. Oh, and if you'll notice, that's the same thing that this second term is, right? So I don't actually have to factor anything out because I want this in parentheses. So what I do when I already have the same thing here is think of it like you're factoring out a 1, right? Just a positive 1. Because if you do 1 times 4t plus 3, you still have 4t plus 3. See how I got the same thing in parentheses here? So what I can do is I can go ahead and group these together. Now it works because I only have to write it once. Let me show you. 4t plus 3. And then what I would do is I would write these together in parentheses in front of it. And this always confused me when I learned it. So listen to the explanation as to why this works, because I was confused, like, wait, we wrote it twice, right? And now we're just writing it once? Why can we just write it once? Where does that one go? Well, let me show you what we're doing here, right? When we're multiplying these, you're distributing this times this, right? So you're doing 2 multiplications. And then when you're doing 1 times this, you're also distributing it, right? So think of it like you're doing like multiplication 1, 2, 3, 4 times between the 5t plus 1 and the 4t plus 3. But that's the same thing that you're doing here, right? Because if you were to multiply this, you would have to FOIL it. You'd have to do 1, 2, and then you'd have to do 3, 4. You would also have to do it 4 times. It's the same thing that you did up here. So that's why we're able to just write it once. It's not like it disappears. This is just a different way to write this out, so it's shorter. So that would be our answer. Parentheses 5t, hit the button here for squared, plus 1, parentheses, 4t plus 3. All right, let's go ahead and, this one's pretty similar, but it's a little different. Let's do this together. So we have 15t to the third power plus 5t squared plus 12t plus 4. All right, let's think. What's the greatest common factor of this first group? Well, we can factor out a 5 and 2 of the t's. So now let's think, what times this makes the first term? 5 times 3. And t squared times what? T squared times t. And for this second one, 5 times what makes 5? Well, that's just 1, right? And t squared times what? This is the same thing as this, so it's just like times 1. 1 times all this is itself. And let's see what we can factor out from here now. Let's see, the greatest common factor is 4, a positive 4, right? Because 4 can go into 4 and it can go into 12. And since there's not a t in both of these, we can't factor out a t, so we're just factoring out a 4. 4 times what is 12t? 4 times 3t, and look what's happening. We're getting the same value here again. And 4 times what is 4? Just itself, just 1. So here we do the same thing. We write the first ones together, right? We write these terms together, and we write these two terms together, this one. So remember, we can just write that out once. 3t plus 1. And we just showed why we can do that. So the quantity 5t squared plus 4 times the quantity 3t plus 1 is how we would factor this. All right, here we have some negative signs, so let's go ahead and review this one too. Oops. All right. So here we have this group, right? And we have the second group right here. Let's go ahead and see if we can do it without rewriting it. So what can we factor out of this first part? It looks like we can take out a 7, right? So we factor out a 7 and an n squared. What would be left is 2n, right? Because 2n times 7n squared would be 14n to the third power. And minus, this is the same as this, right? So just minus 1. And it's negative because negative 1 times this makes the negative 7n squared. And let's see what we can factor out here so we can also get 2n minus 1 in there. Well, what times 2n would make negative 18? That would be negative 9, right? So if we factor out a negative 9, that will leave us with a positive 2n inside, right? And if we factor out a negative 9 times what makes positive 9? Well, that would be negative 1, right? Negative 1 times negative 9 equals positive 9. All right, and since we got the same thing in parentheses twice, we get to write that together. So that would be 2n minus 1. We only have to write it once. And then we would group the first terms together, right? This one and this one. So we can just write it as 7n squared minus 9 times the quantity 2n minus 1. And I don't think it should matter which order you write it in because of the commutative property. Anything times itself is the same as that self times anything, forwards or backwards, right? 2n minus 1. All right, this one's pretty similar. Let's keep going. Pretty similar. These do get a little more complex as you keep going. Let's keep going. All right, this one's a little bit different, okay? So you wanna make sure with these ones that it's factored completely, all right? So we're gonna factor it similarly, but then we're gonna make sure that we factored out everything that we possibly could, all right? So let's go ahead and look at this one. Remember, we're trying to get the same thing inside. So you might have to move some things around, but let's just try it first without moving anything around, right? Let's just keep these terms in this order. Let's try grouping them together like this and see what happens. So here there's a t and an s variable, right? So let's think, what can we take out of here? Well, I can take out a 10, right? Because 10 goes into 10 and 20. I can take out one t, but not two of them because there's only one here. And then I can also take out an s. So what would be left inside here? That would be 2 times 10 would make 20. And then I factored out a t and an s, but there's one t left over here, right? Because of t squared. So that would be 2t. And then if I factored out 10ts already, well, this would just have to be plus 1 to multiply it by itself, right? And then let's try and factor something out so we have 2t plus 1 left here. Well, I could take out a 5 again, 5 and 10, right? And I can take out 1t. And here we would have, let's see, what 5t times what makes 10t squared? Well, times 2 and times t. Oh, perfect. This is going well. And then 5t is outside already. Good. So this would just be positive 1. All right, so that's our first step, but we can actually go a little further now, all right? So let's do the same thing first. We'll combine these, right? You can just write it once, 2t plus 1. If we write this in parentheses together, 10ts, 10ts plus 5t. Now, the reason we can go a little bit further is because I actually see something that we can still factor out of this first quantity, right? Now look at this, right? This is not completely factored yet because look, there's something in common between these terms. We have this 5t and we have this 10ts, right? We can factor out 5t from there. So if I factor out 5t, let's see what's left. Well, 5t times what? 5t times 2 makes 10, and there's still an s left inside, right? Because I factored out the t. And then plus, it says 5t, so that would just be 1. Don't forget to bring this down too. It's still in our expression. We were just factoring one of our quantities even more than we already did. So this is as factored as you can get this now, I believe. Let's go ahead and write it in. 5t times 2s plus 1 times 2t plus 1. Right, so now you see how to do it when you have two variables also. Good luck with this topic. Again, if you're struggling with it in the beginning stages, try and do this one first, I1, factor out a monomial.